And we're live.
So right now, what's happening is a debate over transgender high school athletes. What's actually happening is that the Democrats, Biden signed an executive order, and it says something in the nature of, transgender people will have all the same rights as everyone else. All right, just get over it. They have all the same rights. They always did. I'm just saying it, and it's understand that. Well, the conservatives are taking the line, and you can look at it. There's two ways to look at it. I don't know which one's quite right. They're saying, this is a great wedge issue for us if we frame it under the guise of what the Democrats are doing is killing women's sports. They want people whose sex is male. This is the correct way to phrase this. People whose sex is male, but their gender is female, to be able to play with athletes whose sex is female, regardless of their gender. And that will destroy female athletics at the high school, collegiate, and professional levels. And it absolutely will. And they are very wily, and it's a very smart move for them to sort of twist things a little bit and create that wedge issue because it's a losing issue. Something like in the high 70s, low 80% of people polled in the United States, people, not Republicans, not a Fox poll, not a CNN poll, 78 to 82% are like, yeah, people whose sex is male should not be competing with people whose sex is female at any level of athletics. We saw the under 15 boys team beat the national championship women's team a few years ago in soccer. Beat the shit out of them. It was 6-1 or 6-2 or something like that. There's countless examples. You talk about lung capacity and heart size and bone density.
Some 15-year-olds are men.
Speed.
Small direction. Small caveat on that, Kyle, which is the direction, right? We don't we're okay with the, or at least I speak for myself, I guess, when I say this. We're okay with, or I'm okay with, women competing with biologically born women competing with biologically born men in that direction. If they have if they change if they're gendered, they transition.
Absolutely,
gender,
yes.
Right. The idea is essentially we don't give people with biological baseline advantages equal access to the same category. Because
no, that's not
just
true.
setting up. You're
people
setting
whose
up
sex
overlapping.
Is female will have to play with people whose sex is female. People whose sex is male will have to play with people whose sex is male.
Overlapping curves, and then you're comparing the far extreme on the curves.
But Filthy, do I understand it? You were saying it. Sex female, you can play with either. Sex male, play with male. Is that what you want?
Well, the idea is if you want a handicap because you're engaged in some sport with people who have biological advantages above and beyond your advantages, and you want to play in that league, I'm okay with that.
I agree.
What actually. I don't want is the opposite.
Let me jump on with you. In weightlifting and bodybuilding, there are competitions where you're pretty much allowed to use steroids, and competitions where you're tested for it. You're not supposed to. If you're a natural athlete, which is the non-steroid term, I'm okay with you competing in both. And I think that's analogous to what you're saying.
Yep, exactly. Analogous. Yep, exactly.
Yeah, and certain sports, it just doesn't matter. I personally...
Chess.
I was going to use chess.
Any kind of racing sport.
The thing is, no. This is sort of a misogynistic, fun little issue to girls. What's happening here? Because women, for the most part, struggle mightily in chess against men. That is the reason why there is men's and women's chess, billiards, darts, plenty of sports which don't require physical height, weight, strength advantages. Nobody ever said bone density mattered when you're taking someone's fucking rook. Okay.
Yeah. Although to push back on that, there are intellectual
why
things.
Why do I think men do better? I think it's because.
Oh, Filthy, please take the floor.
Sorry, half a second. It's just there are things when you look at the gender differences biologically for intellectual pursuits or intellectual things, right? Women are better at facial recognition, right? A lot of the studies show this, right? So if you had a game based around facial recognition, you expect a difference based on gender or based on sex, I guess, depending on how you're looking at this. that would be different between that, right? Like, so you might find that there might be other domains where that's true, but we're not worried about that quite as much. But it's interesting because you might find that depending on what the types of games you look at that for. You might even in a side where you go, okay, everyone could play this because it's just chess, for example, or maybe you find some games similar to chess, like another intellectual pursuit that has some component of facial recognition built into it, and the men might just be worse at it.
I want to get Filthy's opinion on my hypothesis here. I think that by and large, this is in generalities, men are more inclined to get hyper-focused on things. Those things can lead them to become computer programmers, engineers, video game enthusiasts, woodworkers, or whatever. And women are more inclined to dabble in lots of different things. I think one is a master of one and the other is a jack of all trades. Does that jive with your thought on men and women?
I've never heard that. I've never heard that one way or the other. I like the specificity of that. I have heard things like, I think this might actually be Jordan Peterson stuff talking about this. Might have heard it here talking about like preponderance of like men in like CEO kind of positions, and the idea being that there's some selection bias there, right? And this is the same stuff with like the Scandinavian countries with like when you minimize differences in society for what is allowed and what isn't allowed, what is pushed for and what isn't pushed for, what you actually see is you maximize biological differences by doing that. Because if you look, there's only so many things that are essentially driving a difference. So if you take one of those big factors, let's say it's 75% of the differences are driven by societal differences, and you move that societal difference from 75 to 0, all the remaining difference is essentially accounted for by something else, in this case, potentially biology.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that's conclusive one way or the other, but you look at that and you say, well, okay, in a society that's essentially equal, or the most egalitarian society out there, you would expect the most egalitarian results in terms of the selection that people choose for their professions or their career paths. And you don't see that. You actually see it. You see a gender pattern. Now, why is that? I don't know that we know. And
it's multifaceted. There are many factors.
Peterson puts out and says, this is because of gender differences, and
there are societal norms.
That's definitely a potential outcome.
There are societal norms that a lot of human beings, believe it or not, still believe in and want to conform to. Traditional gender roles are very appealing to the majority of people. Yeah. That being said, no one should be forced to become a housewife just because you got a vagina. And no one should be like, why aren't you out there fucking hitting the bricks? Don't you want to be the CEO of the company, Dave?
This is like, equality of outcome versus equality of opportunity, right? This is what we're discussing right here. And the the one that I think we want to aim for is equality of opportunity. Like, we don't have to see an equal number of 50-50 in every single, we don't have to see, for example, in every single business, a perfect representation of, if the society of America is 30% X demographic, 20% Y, 50% Z, we don't have to see every single board look like that.
Agreed.
Right? We don't have to see that, but we do have to have the ability for anyone in that society to potentially obtain those positions if that was something that was interesting to them, and not be structurally held back from that.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, that's right.
I think everyone should be able to do what they want to do without infringing on anyone else's rights. Look, don't get me started on those afflicted individuals.
Taylor's judging.
Those fallen angels. As far as the chess thing goes, I think that look, I don't know a ton about this, but like there has to be something to the fact that our ancestors survived by for one, conforming to gender roles. Women were staying back at the village, right? And perhaps gathering things near the village.
Well, they were doing their core competency, right? No, seriously. What's more valuable? Are you going to use all the energy that you got from the food to send all the women hunting and the men gathering? No, that's a terrible.
That's what I'm getting at. So not only is it more effective,
maybe, but
I think that over time,
with the background in ecological psychology, right? Like, some of the stuff that you probably with these are that you have these like just so stories, right? You kind of retroactively say, well, we have this evolutionary adaptation. Well, what could that have been good for? And it's not a disprovable position, because there isn't, you can't go back and like test it. You can't set up situations for that, right? So you can, for example, do what you just said. Well, if men are stronger, And presumably it's the, if this is like survival of the fittest and it's like only the top percentage are coming back with food, you can't waste that with the women going out and the men staying home. It's just not good enough. You can't test that.
But you absolutely can test it. You can look at the tribes of people that still exist and how they do things, right? Some of these indigenous tribes
in this way.
Some of the indigenous tribes in remote parts of the world, that's exactly what's still going on. And it's not because they watched All in the Family and they were like, yeah, I got to get out there and hit the bricks.
Biologically, that's the only way it would have worked. You can't.
But it's the way
you can say traditionally we've done
and the way it did work.
Like you're saying you can't prove this, but now you're just needlessly deconstructing it, saying, well, you can't prove that. Okay, well then prove why did all of the hunter-gatherer bands that were successful enough to leave little monuments that we found, why did they all engage in the same behaviors? Because they clearly realized, hey, these tribes
but you can posit a different alternative for that.
Oh, it turns out women are a lot more valuable than men. A woman dying.
This is causation versus correlation. We can say these two things move together, and then we can say but there could be another third factor.
That's not even true. I'm saying verifiably, a tribe that puts women in dangerous situations with limited amounts of people to give birth is not going to sustain their population. If they need to be putting men in those difficult situations where they could potentially die, you don't send a band of women, which is your bottleneck of expanding your society. That's so obvious. Like, we don't need to have
I'm responding to the first comment. The first comment was essentially along the lines of like, why would you send women hunting and men stay at home? And because I'm not sure that wouldn't work. And it may or may not work. I don't know, but I'm saying that I'm not sure we have the evidence to rule that out as a possible way that could have happened.
Then I think we do. I think there's the onus is on you to show that those societies existed. Clearly, throughout history, any society knows existed.
I'm saying I'm not sure that the rationale.
I think there's like cave biologically paintings depicting the women back at home and the men throwing spears at mammoths and shit. Like, I think when you look at when they look at fossilized remains of humans, what they find is the men are always much more beaten up. They have many more healed injuries than the women. And it's not because the women were better at dodging attacks. It's because they were in fewer dangerous scenarios.
It's the way it almost has to be done in my mind, because the way let me hold on. That's how it was done. All these societies did it that way, independent of each other. You could go to South America. You could go to South Africa. You could go to Asia. You could go to America, North America. And they all kind of assign the same kind of gender roles, which implies to me that certain genders are better at certain roles.
Yeah,
except I'm talking on my ass.
And what I was getting
at, I don't have like research to back this up, but like a part of this goes, if we have always done this, that doesn't necessarily mean it was the most effective way. Especially when you look at how close to extermination our race humans have been before, how small some of our social structures were.
You can't prove that if we'd done it the way you're implying, it wouldn't have been gone.
No, I'm not implying shit. I'm just literally saying the what you've said doesn't necessarily prove anything. I'm not offering the alternative that this other way existed. I'm just saying we have to be really careful of saying that because it was so, therefore it implies this.
The thing is, where your argument falls down to me is it would work much better if there were one example. But instead, every example lands the same way. There is no Wonder Woman colony where the women did all the hunting and they tried at the no. It literally 0% of the time.
Yeah. Okay, but I can ask a counter argument, and not to the again. I don't have an. I'm not. My outcome is not to try to prove there was some like Amazonian tribe or something like that. It's not my point. My point is more along the lines of some of the patterns of behavior that you have are societally generated and not biologically generated. So it's some of the things you do. Think right now, think your gender roles of a male and go, how many of those are because biologically I cannot do these other things, or how many of these things are society? So to act like there's no input from society seems a little naive to me.
So I actually agree with you, but only in certain places, right? Like if there was a society, I'm going to make it up. Maybe in Russia, men don't sing very often, right? Maybe that's considered feminine.
Yeah, whatever, hypothetically. Go ahead.
And it's like, aha. But when we expand our horizons, we see that the reason there are no men Russian singers is a societal thing. It's not a genetic thing. It's not a gender thing. Because when you look elsewhere, shucks, men are the predominant singers, or maybe it's equal. But when you do something like hunting versus gathering, and they all land on the same, they all come up with the same answer key, I'm like,
it's definitely the evidence to something. It's definitely evidence to something.
It's the evidence that the
and again, when I'm talking when we talk about transgender athletes, and part of what we're talking about is a sense that
have a better chance of surviving.
I mean, it's evidence of
maybe
humans being self-aware enough to know.
All right, so that's not a maybe. So men can literally throw a spear harder. Wouldn't you agree on the average?
Agree.
Men can literally have a higher survivability.
That's the argument for some of the transgender stuff, right? Which is that essentially one biological set of whatever comes off on average, when you look at the distribution curve, better, right? So you could go, okay, well, in general, there's more difference between genders than there are, or within genders than there are between genders, or whatever you want to do with that, sure. But it's still two curves that overlap, except on the extreme, where one curve is ahead of the other fucking curve. When you look at athletes, it's literally the extreme portion of that curve. So yes, I absolutely agree that biology matters for something. But I'm also saying that a portion of the reasons that you do the things you do, and the portion of the reasons that societies have done the things they do, are also attributed to factors outside of biology. Biology is not determinism for everything that happens in that, right?
Aha. So I think I'm starting to understand where this ties into the previous conversation, which is like, why are men better at chess? Societal could be it. It could be that men are rewarded in some way.
It could be like how women are better with facial recognition. It's known men are better with spatial reasoning. And so like it could be like visualizing the board or like predicting moves, something like that. Like that.
That's where I was heading the whole time.
It's
to me, it's about the fact that these men who, through eons of time, we're not quite sure when that first like modern human like came about. I think the fossil records go back about 275,000 years, like the oldest one, where they're like, yeah, that's mostly us.
It looks mostly like
you go back to like Homo habilis. You know, Homo habilis was creating stone tools like 1 million years ago, and we don't know if he could speak or not. Irrelevant. What I'm getting at is that for a very, very long time, the men were hunting and gathering, and the men who could hunt and gather best, and who could do things like drive the mammoths off the cliff, to come up with an ambush scenario, to compete with other groups of humans in war. The ones who were most tactically minded survived. So tactically minded,
but this is the problem. This is where you hit the problem. None of your conclusions, none of your arguments. It's the problem of how you're getting there. And the problem of how you're getting there is you're making just so stories, and you're saying because you go, these things happened, I see a logical connection between them that says this. And this is the problem that Evo Psych.
So you think the problem is that those things may not have happened?
Because there could possibly be alternative explanations, and the more you find, the more
there is a possible other explanation.
If you're calling his like just so arguments, then yours is a nuh-uh argument, because all you're saying is you can't prove this, or you can't make an educated assumption based on. We can absolutely look at how nations.
Taylor, strongman me for a second, right? Like steelman me for a second. Tell me what my argument is, because I don't think you're hearing me.
What do you mean? We've been having the discussion for like 20 minutes now.
Sure, steelman me for a second. Tell me what I'm saying.
Steelman.
I've never heard that.
Okay, so there's the straw man is you give the person you're talking to the least credible version of the argument so you can poke holes in it. Steelman is you rephrase the other person's argument as best you can to give them the most solid idea of that. So you're basically showing I understand and move forward.
So your argument where I disagree is I think that you're saying there's too much up in the air. Like I think like your whole thing is obviously there's some biological determinism there. Obviously, no one would deny that. But you're saying society's impacting that too, and we can't put an exact dot on, in this society right here, maybe it's a 50-50 split. In this society, oh my goodness, maybe it's a 70-30. We can't nail it down as to what it is.
So let me hit the problem that you're having, because you're not saying what I'm saying. What I'm saying is we have to be really cautious making arguments going, okay, all this shit happened in the past in this way. Therefore, it means X, Y, or Z. We have to be really cautious doing that, and we can't test these. There's no experimental method you can do with that, right?
That's true.
There absolutely is. There's dog breeding. I mean, look at there's racehorse breeding. There's a reason why.
You could argue there's a difference here. Because you could argue the difference. Okay.
Let me just make this small point and get there. Sure. There's a reason why when a horse wins the fucking Kentucky Derby, all of a sudden his semen is incredibly valuable. And it's not a societal thing either. It has nothing to do with like what kind of society that horse came from. It's all about his genetics. It's like, hey, that's a fast horse. His children are much more likely to be champions than any other old random horse. And so I'm just saying that the hunter-gatherer tribes that survived, you can go back to the Plains Indians, for example, the ones that were best at their job were the ones who were most likely to pass on their genes. The ones who were not as good at their jobs were much less likely, not only because they might starve, but because the more successful
Let me give you like
tribes,
a textbook counterexample to this. You ready?
Yeah.
Right. We evolve these structures because they're the best structures we can have, right? We evolve these because this is looking at this, we look at this backwards and we go, this is the outcome that would be most beneficial for coming out of this. Look at the fucking human eye. The human eye is a joke, right? You could design that so much better. The way it works isn't optimal. It was just evolutionarily better than the alternative for this to some degree, right? So we look at this. So where I wanted to go with this, sorry, because I kind of got sidetracked on that thought for this, but where I want to go with this is, okay, you do something like memory for faces, right? You can test this now. You can go in, you can put people in experimental paradigms now, and you can test for that. You can experimentally say, okay, we double blind this, whatever else, we set these people up in these control groups. We make sure we're doing the experiment correctly. And we can say, all right, women are better at facial recognition than men, for example. Or you can do this experimentally. You can do this with, you go, okay, you test thousands of men and thousands of women. You look at their strength, their grip strength, their whatever, the distance they can throw a spear. It doesn't make any fucking difference, whatever you can do with this. You can test these experimentally. You cannot test these evolutionary hypotheses as easily backwards like that. So when you make these conclusions drawn from that as an evidence of, well, it worked, this seems to have happened this way historically, or there's more examples of it this way, you have to be really careful with those conclusions, because you can't conclude that with the
so let's
same
take it piece by
degree
piece.
of strength.
So let's take it piece by piece, because I still don't quite understand what you're trying to say. You would agree that a tribe of people who had more food would be more successful?
Sure.
Okay.
Yep.
So there's a lot of
In
factors
general.
that would lead to a tribe getting more food.
Yeah, sure.
But,
I guess I'd have to caveat that, if tribes are failing because of lack of food, the tribe with more food solving that is more. Yeah, sure. I think in general I can give you that. Sure.
Yeah, and all I'm saying is the tools that would get more food would be more successful hunter-gatherers.
Sure.
And
if you're solving for the problem of food, sure. That certainly could be that.
With the biggest thing is like,
but I don't think we. But
solving
the
for the problem
goes,
of food is the bedrock of society. By the way, it's at the point where you have enough food, where you have this division of labor, so that when you have enough food, you can have division of labor. When you can have 10% of your population feeding 110% of your population, then all of a sudden you can have artisans, you can have creatives, you can have a hierarchy of leadership, you can have religion, philosophy, art, all of those things. Without the bedrock of all society is literally having guys who can throw good spears and having guys who can figure out agriculture.
And having women who are safe to procreate and increase the number. And so, like, if I can get in for a sec, I guess what I take umbrage with of what you're saying is that you can absolutely look at massive patterns throughout human history and how societies are organized, how groups of people make decisions, societal roles, and you can make assumptions based on that. And so when you say, hey, well, there's no experiment, we don't have a pure group that we can go to and do an A/B test, like, that's true, but we need, like, making assumptions and looking at patterns. Pattern recognition is kind of one of the things that makes us human. We can absolutely do that and infer
but you go with
to a degree of accuracy. You would say that looking at those things and inferring gives us a better than 50% chance of being right and predicting something. And because of that, it has predictive value. And so we can absolutely look at these things and discern, like, oh, this is kind of why this happened. Is it 100%? No. But to say that we can't make those statements at all because we got to be really risky. It's unless we can do it in a lab coat in the year 2021, like that you lose me there.
But what okay, maybe you say I lose you there, but I'm not sure I do, because what you just said is you just actually represented them as one as a slightly less sure thing than the other, which is the only point I brought up for this, right? Which is, you can say with the one, okay, we experimentally tested that and all, and 500, or I don't know what the fuck the number of societies are out there right now. In all major countries recently, we had a 20,000 population experiment with this, where 20,000 participants in this experiment across many different cultures, and this all tested the same for a difference in, for example, facial recognition in women across all cultures that we tested this in, at a significant difference. And you can make that as a test. Your degree of certainty in that result is higher than your degree of certainty when you go, okay, these things have happened in the past, but we can't experimentally test any of those.
Oh, no.
You say, yeah, there's a pattern, but your degree of certainty is lower, which is the only point I brought up with this.
I think we might be talking past each other a bit. I was more this whole time been like fixated on the hunter-gatherer thing, and that we can look at the roles and draw really kind of pretty set in stone inferences about every society that's gained any kind of success we've ever seen crop up on this planet. Not so much obviously, if we're talking about something like facial recognition, yeah, like we can get a lot better gauge on that because we can do it just now.
And I guess my problem and my pushback is not that we might look at these same things and actually come out the same results of this and say that seems to be that. My problem is the certainty which you attach that. I go to me, I hear that and I think, yeah, probably that makes a lot of sense. That inherently seems to be true. But it might not be, because I can't go manipulate the fucking variables to test that. And we can't do that. So we have to be more careful with that information. That has to be attached to a lower probability than the other information that we're coming out of this.
So
and to me, that's meaningful.
To stick on like the hunter-gatherer examples as we started with, like, would you say, like, given what we've learned on that, like, because there's so much evidence across the world, it's like, okay, we do have a fundamental understanding kind of why males did this, females did this. Unless something groundbreaking comes up, this will be our underlying assumption as to why societies were organized this way the world over.
Well, again, this is the eye example, and I don't think I introduced this very well, right? Which is we could say, well, sight is a really important element, right? It's going to allow us to identify friend from foe, threat from safety, food from garbage, or whatever the house happens to be. Mm-hmm. It would make sense. There's a lot of selection pressure on the eye. We're really going to get this nailed down in an efficient, functional thing. People with more efficient eyes are going to be better at this. Okay, except the eye is an evolutionary fuck up. Is essentially does things less efficiently because it just happened to evolve that way and work enough that maybe it was better than competitors, or maybe it was okay enough that it does it, right? So the problem for me is I don't want to draw the single conclusion from this going, hey, these things are seeming to point evidence in this direction. We can't test them. We can't manipulate them. We can't prove them. We say this is what we've been seeing. And it certainly is evidence. If all societies do something compared to no societies do that, we go, that's probably more likely. Yeah. But it's still at a lower level of probability than the one that we can experimentally manipulate and see, look, we poke this 5 fucking ways, we move these variables around, and it always comes out the same way. This is pretty damn certain. It's about as certain as science gets, right? And those are different. Those are different levels of how much weight we can attach those.
Sure.
So yeah, okay, but that's my point. So when I asked you to steal me, that's the point I was trying to make. I don't disagree mostly with your conclusions. I think that seems reasonable. That seems probable, but I can't be as certain on those conclusions as I can about other conclusions.
No, I want to keep arguing about it.
I'm happy to keep arguing. I love arguing.
Yeah, it's fun. Man, I would have being a caveman would have sucked. Would there have been any good sides? Probably not, right? I was trying to think of like
cave bitches.
I mean, how far the furthest back I'd ever want to go and live there would be like Rome, because Rome was even better than like some of the Middle Ages nonsense. But you go further back from Rome before
way better.
Maybe ancient Greece. Maybe ancient Greece, the furthest back I'd be willing to go.
Taylor, I think you'd be a pretty alpha caveman, right? I think that the skill set you possess, which is pull day, would be
headbutts
and headbutts.
But he would have grown up without a mother. He would have killed her in childbirth.
Yeah. True.
And then they would have sacrificed me to the gods.
I think that you do really well as a caveman, right? Like you would be the chief in this situation. All the bitches would be yours. You'd have, what is that thing where kings get to break in the newlyweds?
I introduced prima nocta in the year.
Yeah, prima nocta would be a thing under your society if you wanted it. I think you're underselling.
Can you imagine?
Anyone believe there was a reasonable thought process behind that? That was a king like, I want to fuck that girl and she's married. She's married to that guy. I'm fucking her anyways. There's no way that was any other benefit from that.
Can you imagine Carano, leaders of tribes in the Stone Age? Grug, new king, hit with the rock in the back of the head. Now Grug, 2 new king. Like you get like 3 days before you got fucked up.
Taylor, you're not. This is where you shine. You're not really vulnerable to hit in the head with rock. They'd hit you in the head
dozens of times,
and you'd be like, "That is not my weakness."
Maybe you're right. Maybe everything's coming up Taylor in the year 5000 BC.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting.
I'm king of the cave.